Hi everyone, welcome to day 3 of our Learning Redefined conference hosted by Showbie. This is our first ever conference, online or face-to-face, whichever you may wish to whatever you may wish to call the conference. We've had a tremendous 3 days. This is kind of coming up to the end of day 3. And for those of you that don't know what Showbie is a hybrid learning platform. It has over 3 million educators globally that's using it. It's very much focused around providing richer, deeper, more meaningful feedback to students. Showbie's been working alongside educators for almost 10 years and has a lot of powerful partnerships with a variety of different applications that are used in education. For this particular session, we've kind of very privileged in many ways to have a number of Edtech Demonstrator schools in the UK. For those of you that might be joining us from outside the UK, we'll kind of, when we do the introductions, hopefully by the time we've gone around everyone, you'll know what an Edtech Demonstrator school is. And we're really focused on having a discussion on how to help schools and organizations, certainly in the UK, but absolutely applicable internationally as well, to kind of develop a successful technology strategy. My name is Abdul Chohan. I'm the VP of Learning at Showbie. I'm a former chemistry teacher, former senior leader, and I've been a principal of a high school as well. Now I'm kind of working with a variety of different schools all over the world to kind of help them support with their kind of strategies and so on. So let's get on and introduce the panel. And I'm going to kind of just start off like you do with these things with the person on the top left on my screen, which happens to be Hannah Croskery from Dalton St. Mary's. Hannah, welcome to the session. Just a bit of an introduction from yourself.
Thank you for the introduction, Abdul. So yes, I'm Hannah. I'm from Dalton-in-Furness in Cumbria in the UK. I'm the deputy head of our wonderful primary school. I've been here for, feels like forever, but it's only probably about 9 years. I'm also the lead demonstrator, as we are an Edtech Demonstrator school. So what that means is that I've been freed up some of my time to work with any school that wants support with technology in general, generally primary schools, and I just love doing it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much. And then moving on to Lindsay, Lynsey Carr from Stevenson Memorial. Lindsay.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I run the integrated technology at Stevenson Memorial. We've been an Apple Distinguished School for 3 years now, and started the Edtech Demonstrator program last year, and just generally very similar to Hannah, love supporting schools across the UK with their journey as well. So really happy to be here.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And then moving on to Dave Monk. He's from Harlow College. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you. Yes, so just thinking, I've been involved in some shape or form with EdTech. I hate to say this, for about 30 years, starting way back at the beginning when we had BBC computers turning up in our library learning resources, which is part of my background, in fact, but I've also been involved in teaching. I've actually been at the college a long time, but my experience isn't just limited to that college. I've been involved in a number of organisations in the past, and we've at Harlow been part of the Edtech Demonstrator programme, working mostly with FE colleges, but also with 1 or 2 schools as well. So I'll probably have more of an FE perspective, further education college that is, if you're not sure. So that's 16 plus age range. Yeah, it's a great privilege to be part of this panel. So I look forward to our discussions.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And thanks for being here. And last but not least, we have Ty Goddard with us. So Ty is the director of the Education Foundation, and he's also the chair of EdTech UK. Ty was absolutely instrumental in kind of starting this project and leading the whole EdTech Demonstrator program in the UK. So I'm going to let Ty kind of talk a little bit about the program itself and a little bit about himself as well. Over to you, Ty.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. I haven't had a chance to chat with these guys for a while. And we worked as a national network last year throughout what was the tragedy, the crisis of COVID. And as in all of these things, there was an enormous amount of triumph. And these three colleagues were part of that triumph. The triumph of not only running their own institutions, but also helping others. And you've heard from all three of them that, you know, there's a deep experience, but I think something really powerful happened in the last year, which was the power of peer-to-peer, Abdul, the power of peer-to-peer. I'm not talking just about Brighton's peers, where I'm talking to you from, but the power of, I had to get that one in, but also, yeah, the power of educators guiding and mentoring others. So for me, being involved with it last year, being involved with this network was really powerful. The other part of my life has been spent with Edtech UK. It's an advocacy organisation. We are the national EdTech community, helping to galvanise government, and that's a job and a half, I have to say, and also helping teachers support other teachers around all sorts of projects around the UK. So it's good to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Ty, just a question to you. The Edtech Demonstrator program, just to kind of give context to people that are joining us or that might be watching this video later on, was that in response to COVID, or was that something that was kind of already being looked at before COVID happened?
It was already being looked at in England, and just for people from abroad, we've got different education systems in these beautiful islands, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland and England, separate levels of autonomy, separate levels of devolution, but the main thing is that they've got different paths in terms of education. So the demonstrator, the peer-to-peer idea had come out of England's 2019 EdTech strategy. So it was already being thought about, and it was going to be the tiniest, you know, and to the credit of the department, they were persuaded to turn it from a very tiny research project. I mean, it was a tiny project. It was quite introverted project to something that became enormously powerful at various times last year. And what we've now got is, we had up to 48. We've now got 44 demonstrators, schools and colleges. And I think that's really powerful. And maybe we could explore that a bit later with Dave's perspective, but a vibrant network that was expanded twice. We were facing, as you all know, we were facing some real calamity. And I think expectations on educators, where we've got no infrastructure, few devices, a little amount of staff capability. There had been a level of neglect. We've got to be really honest, I think, about England. It was quite different from Wales and Scotland, but a level of neglect, underinvestment, I think massive misunderstanding about education technology. And I still think it's there, really, at the heart of the Department for Education. And, you know, that's why events like this are useful, because, you know, we've still got to talk in really powerful terms about EdTech to government, and particularly in England, because I don't think it's understood. I mean, you know, I was giggling this morning when someone sent me some information about the department purchasing 360,000 abacus, which I thought was wonderfully extraordinary. You know, I accept the abacus is really useful. It's a special type of abacus, apparently, with a flat bead as opposed to a round bead. That's really crucial, Abdul. But I'm looking at our country and I'm seeing loads of EdTech companies who specialize in maths. Glasgow, there's a brilliant company. Exeter, there's a brilliant company. Gloucester, there's a brilliant company run by ex-teachers. There's wonderful long-haired people with guitars strumming their times tables, rock stars all around our country. But no, let's go for the abacus. And I suppose the Education Endowment Foundation will say to me that the abacus has been proven from the days of the ancient emperors and has had impact studies and has had a random controlled trial test. Anyway, we've got a long old haul still, and these people are some of the pioneers, Abdul.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on that, it made me laugh, actually. I've just brought it up now. Professor Daniel Muiz, who was with Ofsted until quite recently, he responded to that and he put a tweet out that said, I'm reading it out. He said, "Not convinced lack of abacuses was the key issue in learning loss," right? So yeah. Absolutely get the point around that. So look, let's kind of start off with looking at some of the schools that we have here and obviously the FE college as well. So before we kind of start looking outwards and thinking about how you're supporting others with strategy, it will be good for the audience to understand what is it that you're doing with technology. I think historically, sometimes at the other end of the spectrum, people tend to sometimes think that schools that invest in technology might be thinking that technology is like a golden nugget, you put it in and amazing things happen. But I'm pretty sure I've kind of been through the journey a number of times with different schools. I know for sure that's not the case, but I'd love to hear from the leaders that we have, your organizations. Tell us about before, middle, and after kind of thing. What's that journey been like for you? What have you discovered, and so on? Yeah. So let's kind of start off. Let's start off the other way around. I'll try not to put Hannah at the kind of the first person to answer my questions all the way through. Let's start off with Lindsay. Lindsay, tell us a little bit about your school.
So back in 2012, we decided to take part in a project where we were looking at adding technology to the school. Brief context of our school is in quite a deprived area of the northeast of England, and learning and progress were really poor. And the head teacher at the time, she knew that there was something we needed to do, and kind of started doing some research around this E7 project. So we started off with a class set of iPads in year 5, and that snowballed so quickly that within the next year we had one-to-one iPads across Key Stage 2. We have a mixture of bring your own iPad, parental contribution, and iPads that schools provided. And kind of that's how our journey's developed. We saw great progress initially, and were able to record that in terms of data and old school data as well. Lots of points of progress. But actually what it's done to the children is it's just give them a whole new purpose to their learning. It brings their learning to life. It enhances their learning. And you just have this whole different sense of learning being more fun. They're able to be more creative and expressive and have higher aspirations. And you put this then into the context of our area and the crime rates and the aspiration rates and how many go to college, and to have those aspirations through the use of the technology is just unbelievable. It's really, really, it's just amazing. So we've kind of then developed that further with becoming part of the Apple Distinguished School Programme, and started linking up with schools across the world, really, which has been amazing for us to help us support schools within our local area as well. And then obviously now the Edtech Demonstrator programme, which is, again, we're bringing in other members of staff on board with this. So we're not only supporting other schools, the CPD within our schools getting, we're getting teachers on board and teachers now helping others, and it's been a really good experience.
Fantastic, fantastic. Hannah, tell us a little bit about your kind of journey.
Okay, so I was actually, I came to this school in 2012. So our journey as a guest started at the same time, Lindsay. And actually during that year, I went to a technology exhibition in Preston, because nothing much happens really in Cumbria, I have to say. So we have to go out. So, and it was actually, I always credit Dan Oakes, who was, he's now a head teacher, but at the time he was from a regional training centre. He did a presentation. And I think this is actually where my conversations now with EdTech schools and other schools that I support is, I'm a firm believer in when teachers can see the benefit of something, and in this case technology, that's what hooks them in. And it was that session that hooked me into thinking, we've got iPads at school, we could totally do that. And I got really fired up and excited that I came back to school, said to my boss, Linda, we're not using these iPads properly. There's so much you can do with them. We need to really explore it. So I was teaching in year 2 at the time. So she bought me 15 iPads so I could have one between 2. And Linda always does say that whenever we talk to schools and say, yeah, but you're okay, you've got all those iPads. And Linda always says, we didn't find them under a bush though, did we? We've actually worked hard. And that's our stories that we've actually, when I modelled using iPads and technology in my year 2 classroom, saw the benefits, saw the impact straight away as a teacher for myself and my own workload, and for the children in their engagement, the pace of lessons, I could go on. So then we decided to roll it out through the school, but we did that carefully over a number of years. And so we do now have a one-to-one program of iPads from reception to year 6, but that's taken us a long time. And in that process, we became a regional training centre. Then we became an Apple Distinguished School, because as our journey was very organic and very natural, we kept seeing the benefits, and therefore we increased our capacity to have the iPads. And it was careful planning, careful budgeting. We weren't just gifted them. Linda's very, very good at that. Whereas I'm the excited one, I want more. Linda is very good at organising and keeping the spreadsheets secure. And so that's kind of how we've got to that point, really, is by seeing the benefit, feeling the benefit, and carefully planning it along the way. But then it's good for us to be able to share that with other people, to say, look, I know that you might think that we're doing an amazing job, and we feel we are, but it hasn't been an overnight success. It's been a very organic, and I think that's good for people to know.
Yeah, so it's like small steps, but you're taking them in the right direction, right? And taking your time to kind of build and learn that as you go along. I think that's a really good way of kind of putting it. I do remember a school, actually very locally, that I was called into. It was my old primary school, and from many, many years ago, but the head teacher at the time was kind of interested in doing another laptop trolley or another computer room and so on. And, obviously, one of the things I suggested is that, why don't you do one-to-one in one classroom? You've got enough devices in your school, and just the children, take them home, bring them back. But I described that idea of plumbing, like what does that learning look like? Because it's good to put the taps out, but if you don't have the plumbing, the water is not going to come out. Yeah, so that's my kind of anecdote that I use. So we then worked on the plumbing to see what does that learning look like. And I think after that, I didn't have that much to do with the school, because teachers are teachers at the end of the day. Like you said, you get hooked on, you see the benefit of something, and then you want that for every child in the class. So one of the things I will ask you, though, Hannah, is that what does it look like in your classrooms now? Like, what does the learning look like? Yeah, what can you do now that you weren't able to do in the past?
Okay, well, really good example is I've been observing lessons this week. So I was in the year 5 classroom yesterday morning, and it was an English observation, actually, but it was, in fact, a complete showcase for technology. And I got a real buzz from it, because obviously I've felt the hard work that's gone into it. And the benefits were that we follow something called Success for All, which is heavily paper-based, but actually, because the children did use their iPads and everything was linked on Showbie, so they used Padlet, they used Poplet, and actually the pace of lesson was absolutely astonishing. There wasn't a minute wasted. So the children do all have access to an iPad, and all their learning resources are on there. So there's no time giving out papers. There's no time sticking in books. So the learning just flows from part to part to part without any interruption. And it's just seamless. So the children are completely engaged, because one example is when she was asking for ideas, the link to the Padlet, which is absolutely amazing, enabled every child to put their answer down at the same time. I could see it on the screen at the same time they were typing it. So the level of engagement was massive, and it didn't matter the skills of the children. They could get their answers down, and it meant those who are not confident didn't have to put the hand up. They can magpie ideas off each other, so they feel they can have their own voice. And it was just, the learning is just, the pace of lesson is massive, and the student engagement is just brilliant. It was such a joy to watch.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you very much. And just coming on to Dave, thank you for waiting patiently, Dave. Your perspective is kind of quite key, because you're from an FE college, right? So tell me a little bit about your journey from an FE perspective, 16 plus, obviously different challenges, different contexts, and so on. Fire away. Tell us a little bit about Harlow College.
Okay, I was just sort of thinking for a minute there, because as I said, mentioned that when we were talking earlier about having a longevity in this whole EdTech world, without getting into great detail, but massive changes have taken place probably over the last 10 years. And what we're witnessing now, and what Hannah and Lindsay both demonstrated very clearly, is how rapid and sort of important that change really is, compared to where we would have been if we were having this conversation, say 15 years ago. We were talking about EdTech then, but what we were talking about then is a very different picture, very different story to what we've got now. I'm only going to go back a little bit in our journey. In fact, I'm going to go back to when we ran a Learning Futures project, which was about 7 years ago, that I led. And it was through that we started to introduce the idea of using iPads in the college. Prior to that, we'd just got PCs dotted around the place, and learning centres that everybody had to cram into to get access. And there were various other issues in the background that were blocking what we were trying to do, or what our new principal was trying to do, because our principal, Karen Spencer, came to the college really looking to make some changes where we were before, I guess. And through the Learning Futures project, which had its roots in FELTAG, and anyone in FE, I will nod, will remember FELTAG. FELTAG was about trying to sort of boost the idea of blended online learning much more strongly in the sector. And our project looked very much about how to implement blended learning. And we did that through a couple of teams in our college, our business studies team and our media, digital media teams. And we introduced iPads in those areas. It was quite clear quite quickly that these were very successful, and that the students took to using them very well, and the staff did. So sort of about a year after the project, a decision was made to invest in iPads for all teachers in the college and all students on a one-to-one basis. And that was quite radical, really. It had to be underpinned initially by an improvement across the infrastructure, because you can't be offering this kind of setup where you've got poor infrastructure, where the Wi-Fi is poor in different buildings, etc., etc. So the college made a deliberate investment in the Wi-Fi and in infrastructure to improve that, to improve access. And the whole basis of what we've done, therefore, has been about access for all of our learners and for all of our staff. That's been quite a journey. And I'm sure that the schools have sort of experienced similar things, where you've got staff who are suddenly presented with an iPad. What do I do with this? Where do I go with it? Some staff were quite clearly very keen, very capable. We called them runners. They were in straight away. We set up our digital innovation team, which I'm part of, to provide support for that area, but it was still a beginning, so it was still early days. And we had a lot to sort of work through. And of course, we had to start introducing the iPads into the curriculum. And the first year was probably not exactly rocky, but certainly a learning experience. What we then decided to do was to look at what we started off with a core 5 sort of key apps and learning platforms that we wanted to use, that we'd already trialed mainly through the Learning Futures project. So Padlet was a good example of that. Showbie was very definitely one of those. And then we increased that to our top 10 the following year. And running in with that was, like the schools, we became involved with the ADS, and we were successful, and we were delighted with that. We've been successful twice now. I think we're the only further education college in the country to have achieved that accolade. And it's been a journey, but the key thing I would say at this point in time is that we've recently been involved in a national survey with JISC, and many of you will be familiar with JISC, many of you probably won't be, but they're a major agency in digital and in technology in the country. One of the questions that we put in was our own question from an earlier survey of our own. How confident are you as a digital teacher? Now, if I'd have asked that question when we did ask that question in the past, our teachers would have said, not really, not very keen, not sure. But now I think the latest figure is about 90% of our staff feel confident or very confident or extremely confident as digital teachers. And I think the last year in particular has been a great driver for that. So, involved in all of that, we've sort of developed with the Edtech Demonstrator team as well, led by my colleague Kelly Edwards, and really that again is about how we've been in a position where we can start to demonstrate to our colleagues in further education colleges and also in schools, just what is possible.
Brilliant. So I think really what I'm kind of seeing as a picture from all of you is that, it is a journey, right? It's not like something that you just suddenly take on and hit the ground running. There's a certain degree of investment that needs to happen. Yes, with devices and financial, but also from an intellectual capital kind of perspective in terms of training, support, staff development, and so on. It may be argued that actually that's the harder part, giving out the devices in many ways. Yes, there's cost and expense and all of that, but actually once the devices are out, the real kind of, fruit of the labor is going to come from the development of teachers and staff and so on. So I'm just going to kind of bring in Ty on that particular aspect. Like nationally, Ty, yes, we've got the Edtech Demonstrator program. Where do you think we are in terms of staff development with things like, digital literacy and so on? Because ideally, I would think that we would want teachers to be in a position whereby their understanding and application of pedagogical knowledge that would be on par with their understanding of how to use technology and how not to use technology. Yeah. But there certainly is a gap there at this moment in time. And, when I sometimes look at Teach First courses, when I look at MPQSL, MPQEL, and so on, I don't really always see that kind of digital development, that kind of, operational efficiencies, all that kind of stuff that's embedded within there. So, what is, Education Foundation, Edtech UK, what is the goal? What is the kind of lobbying that needs to happen around that?
Cool. That's a big load of questions.
I know, Ty. I know.
No, it's all right. Yeah, you ask one and you get 25 for free. I love it. Probably like my answers actually, so I apologize too. It's just listening to these experts, it is the most difficult organizational challenge. This is about organizational change, and whether it's, a small primary school or a bigger secondary school or an even bigger FE college, then we all know, and I did like Dave's comment about runners, these people that will pick up that device and run with it. But it's such a complex and fluid combination and set of issues that push, that pull, the leadership. Sometimes it has to be evolutionary, sometimes it's got to be revolutionary, it's got to be culturally specific. Lindsay would stress also that and she's absolutely right, I think it's got to be really sensitive to community context. It's definitively, I think, about some levels of investment and shattering new thinking. Why have fixed computers in fixed rooms that are only used for a certain amount of time? How can you translate those fixed costs into costs that you can liberate and then invest in equipment? So it's really, really complicated. And my firm belief is that Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland are further ahead. And I'll tell you why. Because there are some people that are missing right now in English education, and it's Ofsted are missing in action about digital learning. I think all of our professional qualifications in education are missing in action because there isn't many that have any mention of digital, Abdul. I mean, that is shocking. Yeah, we're about to unveil a whole new series of providers for professional qualifications across our country. This is England I'm talking about. And there are so few. I mean, I can't find many, to be honest, that have any focus on the digital learning. And then also initial teacher training. Hardly a mention of digital pedagogy. And I think it goes back to this point of going back to the 2019 EdTech strategy. Someone said again on social media that it was very hard to find a mention about teaching and learning in that EdTech strategy. Now that again is it's as shocking as purchasing 360,000 Abacus, perhaps, because at the heart of EdTech is it supports everything that you do now as a teacher, but also it then can take you into completely different places in terms of your pedagogy. We all know that SAMR model, yeah, where you initially substitute, but then you redefine, yeah, you redefine. And we've got lost in this knowledge skills debate, and people like Dave will be really familiar. We're all familiar with it, I guess. Yeah, that there's a body of knowledge. It's sacrosanct, and we can never go out of that square that's often white. It's often about the empire. It's often about talking at pupils, not talking with pupils. So it's very defined. It's very square. It's very square in lots of ways, perhaps. Yeah, but actually, what EdTech and what technology does is I remember he was a lovely head of a school that I got to know really well. I used to work in Brighton and Hove for the council here and advising schools on extended services. And I met Derek from Hove Park. Hove Park's now been on this tech journey. And I said to Derek, I said, why are you bothering with this EdTech stuff, this one-to-one device nonsense? And he said, you know why? He said, because tech is like, and it echoes what Lindsay was saying, it echoes Hannah's and Dave's descriptions. He said, tech is like a TARDIS. It can take you anywhere. It can broaden the mind. It can consolidate knowledge. It can allow you to practice skills. It can allow you to enrich in your teaching, but also you as a teacher. Yeah, not just the teaching, but you as a professional. And I think that's what we're missing here in England. And yes, we've got to take some lessons from Scotland and Wales. By the way, it's not just utopia across the border. They've made some, they're learning too, this journey that you talked about. But England seems to be now disabling itself, disabling perhaps its children from the experiences that digital can help with. And what worries me, final point, is, people have got rid of the fear factor. These people on the panel were responsible, and you yourself have done so much of that work, responsible for getting rid of the fear factor. during COVID about technology. Yeah, all the scary stories about technology, and now what we can't do is go back to the box, go back to that square box that attempts to buy loads and loads of abacuses and ignore our world-leading edtech firms. We've got world-leading edtech firms, Sparks in Exeter, Sumdog up in Scotland. You know, we have got loads of expertise, and it's almost as if we just want to pretend that they don't exist.
True. Good
So,
point.
yeah, both optimistic and I am,
Yeah,
to be honest with you, a little bit wary.
I think the hope is that, and we have, I mean, the Edtech Demonstrator program is brilliant because it's bringing up schools like we have today up to light, and people can kind of go and see, visit, connect, and communicate, and so on. So just moving on to that, I'll probably ask Lindsay, how has that been for you? Like, as soon as you became part of the Edtech Demonstrator program, give us some insight. Like, how have you been working with schools? What's the demand like from schools wanting to work with you? How are you advising them? You know, what kinds of conversations are you having with them? How are you helping them to build a strategy?
I think my expectation was that everyone would have something to work with, and that was not the case. I have most of the queries I have started from scratch, where they've had no advice, they haven't been given advice from the local authority, they've really struggling, just didn't know what to do. Well, is it just for COVID? Is it just for then schools who've got a grounding and kind of built, so the queries are, I don't know about anyone else, but my queries have just been so varied that I haven't been able to kind of say, well, I'm going to spend this amount of time with this school, because it could be something really simple with one school, and then the next it could be like, I'm still supporting schools now, just as COVID happened last year. So I think that was what opened my eyes a little bit across the country, the fact that there were so many schools not prepared for COVID. And just even having simple technology within the school wasn't there. Nothing they could just simply set up. You know, yes, they might have a school website. Well, where do I put my work? How do I get just simple things that just weren't there, and the fact that they didn't have anybody else. And it's great that, of course, we can support them, but if this didn't happen, who else would be there for them? And that's kind of my kind of take on it all. I think very, very broad level of support.
Right. Thank you. Hannah, how has your experience been like? What kind of schools have you had? Same question.
Similar to Lindsay, interestingly, in the autumn term last year, it was all very much about, look, we've had one lockdown, how did you respond? And obviously there was a massive range of how people did respond, how schools did respond. So the autumn term was very much, look, now you've got the options, you've got Microsoft Teams, you've got Google, you've got Showbie. So that was kind of a preparation part. But then obviously in January, it was kind of mad panic, because not everybody had used the autumn term to get themselves ready. But it was interesting that there was so many schools where I'd do a staff meeting and they hadn't come on board the programme till maybe February. And actually, I would say, well, look, tell me what you've been up to so far. What have you done so far? And honestly, lots of them were just relieved when I said, look, you've done really well to go from zero online learning to manage to figure out how to do it yourselves in a week. Some of them did it because it was a kind of a surprise, wasn't it? And there was that relief, actually, that I wasn't going to say to them, no, you've done it all wrong, because so many of them had to get on board with it, and so many of the schools did just do that. So then my job was really to kind of fill any gaps or support those that had just kind of done it in a panicked way and not really got those skills. So and then obviously coming out of it now, everybody's kind of done the lockdown learning for the second time up here. So now we're moving towards, let's go for that long-term vision. Don't just, like Ty said, don't just go back to how you were before. Hopefully you've now got a confidence and a competence that you didn't have in the autumn term. So let's take that and build on it. So I'm trying to really encourage schools to appreciate how far they've come already and then look forward.
And are you seeing that the same schools, okay, they wanted to do, like immediately they needed something together for COVID and lockdown and so on, but is there an appetite for a long-term plan, a long-term strategy around this?
Yeah, that's what I'm really trying to encourage. And I think there's lots of schools that even though they managed in lockdown, they've got still got a range of the competence and confidence of staff. There are some that are still just like found it really easy, and some that have found it very stressful. So what I'm trying to do is to help schools get like just equalize those competence and confidences to then move forward as a whole school, because that's what I found worked well here, was that we did take our time. And like David said, initially we had those 5 apps that we just wanted everyone to use really well, and we've stayed together as a whole school. And I think that's kind of the success story, is that it's a whole school kind of vision and plan, really. So it's kind of, I'm encouraging everyone else to do that. So not thinking, well, so these few year groups are still using online learning, so that's what's kind of covered. No, actually, every class can be online learning with a hybrid model or however they want to organise it, but it's possible for every year group. So let's get together as a whole school and have that whole school vision.
Dave, from an FE perspective, how have you been able to support? Are you working just with FE colleges? Are you working with schools as well? Like, what does it look like from an FE perspective?
Okay, well, we have worked with 1 or 2 local schools. I can't really speak directly on that because my colleague's been more involved directly on that side. But I sort of found, when we were talking to people last term, in the autumn term, that I was surprised how many colleges weren't really thinking strategically. They were having to be assisted and coached into thinking in that way, moving away perhaps from situations where, you've got enthusiasts working in a corner somewhere in a silo and doing great things, but it isn't something that's represented at the strategic level, at the senior level of the organization. We have lots of people who are very, very keen to learn and to know more. But the other thing a little observation really, again, drawing on many, many years experience, I can go back, as I say, 20 odd years on the Edtech ILT, as we used to call it back in the turn of the century. And there were colleges that, some of our local colleges that we work with, who were sort of leading colleges 15 years ago. Somewhere along the line, something changes. Organizations change, management changes, new principals come in, different priorities take over. Ofsted can be, quite a sort of damaging thing in a way to colleges, thinking what Ty was saying in a sense. A bad inspection suddenly wipes out the entire management. Good work that's gone on in the past, the people involved in that, the enthusiasts, the people who are trying to do something have gone. And then suddenly you'll find you're talking to college leaders or college colleagues who are sort of, it's a new unknown world. It shouldn't be like that. We shouldn't have got to that point. We should have built on the good work that have been going on in many institutions over many years. But in reality, we haven't really done that. And so in a sense, we're kind of dropping in, and the worry again is that we've got to build resilience for the future. It's got to be an ongoing thing. It can't just be, well, okay, we're going to use iPads this year, but in 3 years' time, we're going to ditch all of that, and we had a bad inspection, boot the principal out, or whatever it happens to be, because all of that is actually potentially quite damaging. You have to consolidate and continue to develop. By the way, I do like Ty's TARDIS analogy. I was thinking with an iPad, oh, it's so small on the outside, but when you open the door, when you go inside, there's so much there. It's so rich and it's so powerful, and there's so much you can do with it. And really, it doesn't have to be an iPad. It can be any sort of technology, and maybe an electronic abacus could be quite good fun. But it's how you establish that and how you're underlying sort of setup will continue to support the future, because the future is going to be digital. We can't escape it. And that little box that some people are still working in, unfortunately, is not going to last. It's going to be blown apart in so many ways.
I think we're really kind of, if we don't invest in tools that are relevant, and I know that obviously schools here are using iPad, and you're right, David, it doesn't have to be. The school organization might decide to do something else. But for me, technology has to be relevant. Yeah. If you're using technology that really is outdated, we're actually doing a disservice to the professionals in the organization, because we're automatically de-skilling them. They don't know it. Technology has moved on. They don't really know how new tools that have been invented actually transform things. Today I did an interview with an educator, a girl from Liverpool who's working in the UAE at a British school that has 90% EAL. So they teach the British curriculum, but it's all Emirati kids. So huge challenge, 3,600 children in the school.
Yeah.
And she's using Socrative to automate all her assessments and quizzes because she sees 200 children a day. She's able to give really high quality feedback. She's using all the voice stuff and so on. To be able to do that without having these kinds of tools, actually, I think it would pretty much be impossible, or you'd be doing such a poor service, and the poor teacher that would be kind of, that would have to do that, it would literally take over their life if they tried to kind of, actually make that happen. So I think from an efficiency perspective, I think that, it's almost like a moral imperative in some ways that the technology really has to be there. One thing I will mention, this is off the back of what Ty said, and this is kind of my perspective. Those of you that know me, you'll know that I'm always kind of living on a plane and moving from here to there and so on, except for during lockdown, I've kind of been stuck in the house. I know the neighbors now. But one thing I kind of learned working with another school, actually it was in the UAE. Now, what was interesting is the government has a digital plan. So reduction of paper, building in efficiencies, having evidence of learning that's digital and not necessarily paper-based. It's something that's written into the curriculum. So what you then see is automatically there's this appetite, and the equivalent of Ofsted over there actually look for these skills when they come into school as well, and the schools get kind of rated on it and so on. Now the rating stuff and all that we can argue about, but you're right, and I think tying into what Dave said, if suddenly Ofsted come in and this is not really, a part of the, the inspection, then yes, leaders will come in and think, oh, this is a nice to have. We don't really need this. Out it goes, and let's just do the basics, or let's get the main things right, and so on. That kind of language, and good stuff just suddenly disappears. So absolutely hear you on that. Ty, you were going to say something.
Yeah, it's just I'm the conversation sparking a lot. One of the big positives was, and Hannah referred to it, was the kind of human. Yeah, that we were in a time of crisis last year, and Lindsay referred to it as well. Just reassuring people that they were doing the best with what they had. And that was absolutely vital. This was about being humane, and evidencing humanity. And then also what came out of it, I think, the Edtech Demonstrator program, was being able to introduce some of the demonstrator schools and others to Ofsted to meet with one of their senior researchers, facilitated by the guy that you quoted his tweet, Daniel Mers, I think, and look, he I think was perhaps an EdTech skeptic. There's nothing wrong with being a skeptic, but skepticism isn't just about shutting a door. And what we established as part of the Edtech Demonstrator last year was a dialogue with Ofsted. Now, I've not agreed with everything that they've they've surmised and written about technology, because I still think it's very narrow. I still think it's got a vision of quite a narrow, colourless use of EdTech. But actually, there may be an interest, there may be a flickering of interest in the inspectorate, but we need system change. And all of these colleagues have talked about how their institutions have been changed as a system. But we also need a wide, if you imagine the circles, you know, a whole series of circles, we need a system-wide view of why digital is important. You know, it's not a digital economy anymore, it's digital. It's every aspect of our lives, socially, in terms of our relationships, in terms of our politics, our democracy, I think needs a much more serious adult look at this, rather than this binary nonsense. You know, it's all got to be knowledge. Yeah, that you know, it's all about skills. Well, in fact, we all know it's both. It changes. It acts against one another. It's got different emphases one day, one action. And what you talked about, I think, was purposeful EdTech, was using technology. You know, we still like books, by the way. Yeah, I still read books. Yeah, I'm talking to you like this. I've got my laptop here that I'm wobbling around, but I still love the book. We still love the book, and or the textbook has its place. As you know, as an abacus has its place, I'm sure. But what we're saying and what we're arguing is that you've got to have a much richer, much more imaginative, much more loose view of what EdTech can do. And there are areas of promise. I loved it. I loved it when schools said, well, we've used an online parents' evening and parents love it. And then people would say, well, why do parents love an online and teachers love it? And they said, well, it's efficient. We can go home. This was the teacher. We don't have to stay really late at school. We can have a bite to eat and we can go online and we can keep people to time. Parents liked it because it felt more respectful. It was to time and they were at home.
And
now,
on that,
isn't that funny? How
on that point, Ty, so many schools that I've spoken to that did parents' evenings online actually were able to quantify that more parents attended those sessions.
Yes.
Than they would having to kind of come into school and so on. And some are actually considering doing the next parents' evenings online. And I don't know what the panel feel. Hannah?
Yeah. So during the lockdown in January, we used Google Meet for all of our sort of live lessons. And when it came to parents' evening, we worried, because the children had their iPads at home and therefore it was all set up and it was easy. We worried about parents, you know, kind of accessing Google Meet or Microsoft Teams, sort of with their own device. So we just used a video chat in Showbie, and we just, honestly, complete game changer. And we hadn't really maximized that use before, but when we asked, we had a weekly drop-in online for our parents, and after the parents' evening, 100% of them said, absolutely, best thing ever. And it was just so easy. They didn't have to download anything. They were just part of their children's Showbie class. We just joined in, they joined in, genius. We're definitely
there. Yeah, so our argument, I guess, is just don't stop there. If a change like that produces respectful relationships that you perhaps have not had before, feelings of, I can actually go to this parents' evening and I've never been before, that's interesting. And then you can begin to think about how you can redefine the whole relationship. That's just one aspect. Don't stay there. No. Because, you know, what this whole narrative as well, you also have to be slightly wary of the whole narrative of lost learning, I think, because many people say to me, and we read it, that actually their young people have benefited from lockdown. And also technology clearly opens up after hours school learning. You know, there was a big movement. You know, Dave talks about, we have policy direction, we get institutional memory, and then all of a sudden they stop. Well, after hours school learning, study support, extended schools were massive movements up to 2010, and then bang, it stopped, and then we're off on another policy journey. There's no long-term plan. There's no sense of consolidating one era's policy. And I feel the same about EdTech. We've got so much potential. These people are the potential that you're talking to. And what they've done, Abdul, what they've done, and they won't say it themselves, is they're absolute heroes and sheroes. They've held people together. They've been the glue to keep institutions going, and they've opened up new worlds. You know, and sometimes they might have felt frustrated that you know, some of the situations, they've been difficult. It's been like being on a roller coaster. Now, what they're now going to do is go and talk and develop strategies. And that's where we need to go. Not 40 odd page strategies, but strategies that live, strategies that empower teachers, strategies that support teachers and their learners. So these people are the heroes.
Absolutely.
I was just going to say, I was in a governing body meeting last night, and they were talking about the skills for the future and what they want the children to do. And obviously there was a lot of talk around social interaction and, you know, children getting back and doing things. But I just said, and I totally agree with everything they were saying, but don't forget what got you through this lockdown, because it was the technology that got you through the lockdown. And it would be, you can't just forget that. If we didn't have that technology, how would you have achieved everything that you achieved?
Yeah.
So yes, there's definitely a room in the future to bring everything back and, you know, get this social interaction going again. But let's not forget what we've used and what we've learned.
Can I sort of dive in and just sort of add something a little bit more from the sort of FE point of view, but it's about adult learning now, because we're talking obviously about schools and we're talking about colleges where we're working predominantly and have been for several years now with the sort of 16 to 18 age group in the main. But we've lost our adult learning completely. And the EdTech, if we use it properly, and we've got to think in terms of the future where, you know, people will need to retrain. My son-in-law works for Ford's. There's always a danger that they may close down and he will be forced to retrain to something else. Now he's only in his 30s. He's got, you know, where's he going to go to get that training? At the moment, it'll cost him a fortune to train just to become an electrician, for instance, if he wanted to do that. We need to be thinking again about that future where adult learning, further education colleges are very good for this. And we're talking about it now. We're seeing the sort of, again, the sort of little green shoots perhaps, but we lost so much in the past where we were already doing a lot of work. But the EdTech gives us that platform, that way, that entree into that area again. And I think we've got to revisit that very strongly.
Absolutely.
Dave, as soon as you said that, I can see a rainbow is just appearing over Central Brighton. Literally, seriously, I'm not kidding you. As you said that, I can see a massive rainbow now outside the window. But it's true.
That's my spirit guide, Si. I have a spirit guide. I was teaching an archaeology course many years ago, and I hadn't practiced archaeology for many years, and I suddenly sort of launched myself into an AS teaching program, and I felt I had a spirit guide there that sort of made things happen, and it was using a VLE for the first time and getting people engaged and things like that. But sorry, that's a slight, well, it isn't an aside, because in a sense it was relevant, because again, that was with adult learners, but they're not there anymore, and they would like to come back. And it isn't just, again, about knowledge and skills, it's about how you improve your view of the world, how your experience of the world can be improved. And again, digital can do that. So powerful.
I mean, the online kind of learning sector, I'm not talking about education now, as in schools, but outside of that, you know, companies like Coursera, Udemy, and so on, you know, industry are using that to those platforms to kind of have employees train themselves, learn more, self-paced learning, flipped learning, online learning, blended learning, all of that stuff is kind of continuing. I mean, I've had a number of conversations with organizations. It's interesting, like with this role in Showbie, I thought I'm only going to be like speaking to schools, and most of the time I am. But when Honda gets in touch with you to say, hey, we want you to kind of trial out Showbie for our employees when we get new models of cars, we want, you know, verbal feedback on there, we want them to submit things back to us and so on. What you then realize is, hang on a minute, we've just been talking about schools, but this is where our kids are going to end up. And actually, this is something that's not going to stop, you know. Greater Manchester Police Force, you know, using Socrative, right, as part of their kind of training mechanism and upskilling police officers and so on. I mean, you know, the idea that learning never stops is not just something that's written on a wall and stuck up there. It's got to be something that we embed, and the tools that are going to allow us to kind of continue to do that is something that, you know, that should really, I mean, logic just dictates that when children leave school, they should be familiar with that approach to that self-paced learning. Yes, with the teachers and so on, that's obviously going to be key there when they're there, but actually when they then go into their professional lives and careers, this is something, you know, that will continue to kind of grow. So absolutely take that on board. I've just done that thing where I've tapped on my phone just to check the time, and we've gone over. Yeah, it's kind of weird. This is happening to me all the time. I'm always thinking I'm going to stop a few minutes before, but these kind of conversations are really, really fascinating. Just one last thing. If people are listening in here and people are watching this video, and they want to connect with you, okay, they want to kind of reach out and for you to help them with, as part of an Edtech Demonstrator program, and then to reach out to you, how do they do that? How do they go about doing that? Is it different for each of you, or can any one of you say, well, you just go here and you can find us there?
Well, I'd love them just to email me. That would be a straightforward way to do it. I don't know if you can share my all of our email addresses.
Yeah, we can do that.
There is actually the launch of the EdTech program is it next Tuesday?
Yep. 26th.
Next Tuesday.
Yeah. So it's like, so there's the launch that they can go to, or there's a website.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a central website called the Edtech Demonstrator. People just look up.
Yeah, that, you should just be able to kind of find that, and then find your schools there as well. But okay, right. Well, we're going to stop there. I'm sure we could have carried on with this conversation for a very long time. First and foremost, thank you very much for all of you kind of, you know, making the time after a busy day at school, work, and so on, kind of, you know, being here and sharing your wisdom and your approaches. It's really, really appreciated. And, you know, I just wish you all the best and continue with all the amazing work that you guys have been doing. And hopefully, maybe I'll probably invite you at some point again, just to do a podcast with you and your school, maybe some other teachers and so on, just to be able to kind of, you know, share more things, do a bit of a deeper dig into your approaches and so on for your own organizations as well. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.